They thought they could bully me out of my own land. The HOA said I was trespassing on property I owned. But when the county records came back, the truth surfaced like a ghost from the deep. I didn't just own my lakeside lot. I owned the entire lake they'd been using for years. And what happened after that? Let's just say, justice has a way of rippling outward. Subscribe for more real-life tales where greed meets karma, and justice comes quietly, like water reclaiming its shore. When I first saw the lake, it was a mirror of serenity. The early morning fog floated just above the still surface, and the hum of cicadas filled the air like background music to a forgotten dream. I stood there on the old dock with a coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the tree line. The reflection shimmered orange and gold, and for a brief moment I thought, this is it. This is peace. But peace has a funny way of hiding under layers of paperwork, politics, and pride. The property was listed as Lake Reserve Parcel 17B, a neglected piece of land that had once been part of a larger private estate before being sliced into lots and sold off over the decades. Most people avoided it, something about HOA restrictions and legal confusion. But I had a background in real estate law. Where others saw red tape, I saw opportunity. So when I bought the parcel, I didn't just buy the shore. I made sure to check the deed carefully, and there it was, a vague but powerful phrase buried deep in the legal description. Includes full rights to the water body within the boundary of Lot 17B as recorded on Plat 1976. No one noticed it. No one questioned it. Not even the seller. For months after moving in, life was quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the world. Ducks nested near the reeds. My dog, Jasper, chased frogs along the edge. I repaired the dock myself, one plank at a time. Then one morning, everything changed. A letter arrived in my mailbox, stamped in bold red. Notice of violation, HOA Compliance Department. They claimed I had unauthorized structures on community property. The dock I rebuilt. The kayak I left tied up. Even the small, no fishing, sign I placed near the cattails. The letter was signed by Elaine Carter, HOA president. I'd seen her before. A tall woman in her late 50s, thin lips, always wearing oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days. She drove a white Lexus and carried herself like she owned the neighborhood. That afternoon, she showed up in person. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel before I saw her. She didn't knock, just appeared at the edge of my lawn with a clipboard and 2 other HOA board members trailing behind. Their matching polo shirts and stiff posture reminded me of a cult of conformity. She looked past me, toward the lake, and frowned as if the water itself offended her. I kept my distance, letting her talk. She said the lake was community property, maintained by HOA funds, and that my unauthorized modifications violated aesthetic harmony standards. I asked calmly if she had a copy of the deed. She didn't. Instead, she said the HOA had always owned it. That word, always, rang in my ears long after she left. I knew I was right. But something in her tone told me this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the letters multiplied. HOA citations, threats of fines, even warnings about legal escalation. They sent a contractor to inspect the dock without my permission. When I confronted him, he said he was just following orders. Then came the day the police showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I was trimming hedges when 2 squad cars pulled up near the mailbox. Officer Miller, a local cop I'd seen before, approached cautiously. He said the HOA reported unauthorized activity on community property. I handed him the deed copy I kept in a plastic folder. He skimmed it, brow furrowing deeper with every line. Finally, he nodded. This says you own the lake? Elaine was standing behind him, arms crossed, her face pale but tight with anger. That's not possible, she snapped. The HOA has jurisdiction. The officer handed her the paper. Ma'am, this says otherwise. She looked at it, and I swear, for a moment, her hand trembled. Later that evening, I got a call from the county office. The clerk confirmed what I already knew. According to public record, Parcel 17B encompassed the entire lake body, not just my slice of the shore. Which meant every fishing pier, every fountain, every kayak rack, every HOA-funded beautification project, all of it, sat on land I owned. And suddenly, everyone's tone changed. Emails started arriving, polite this time. Perhaps we could discuss a mutual understanding. We'd love to negotiate access rights. But by then, something deeper had stirred in me. It wasn't just about ownership anymore. It was about principle. For weeks, they treated me like an intruder, a nuisance, an outsider trespassing on their property. And now, they were realizing they'd been trespassing on mine all along. That night, as the sun dipped below the tree line, I stood at the end of the dock again. The water looked darker now, not peaceful, but powerful. A silent witness to everything that had happened. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear laughter from the other side of the lake, the HOA's clubhouse deck, where they held their weekly wine gatherings. They had no idea what was coming. Because by morning, I would file an official restriction notice, revoking all public access to my lake. And that's when the real war began. By dawn, the stillness of the lake was gone. Emails, texts, and phone calls exploded across the neighborhood as word spread: the lake was closed. The HOA's beloved community centerpiece was suddenly off limits, fenced off by nothing but a few printed signs nailed to wooden stakes reading: private property, no trespassing. Trespassers will be reported. It wasn't about revenge. Not at first. It was about principle and respect. I filed the restriction order through the county clerk's office at 8:43 a.m. By law, as the property owner, I had every right to control access, maintenance, and liability for the water. No swimming, no fishing, no boats, no HOA projects, unless I said so. But by noon, the HOA board was already in crisis mode. Elaine Carter held an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. From my back porch, I could hear her amplified voice over the lake's surface, trembling but fierce. The HOA members crowded the patio, clutching papers, shaking heads, muttering words like illegal, fraud, and reversal. They were panicking. And that's when I realized how deep their pride ran, because it wasn't just about the lake. It was about power. The HOA had built its entire image around that shimmering water. They bragged about it in brochures, used it for real estate ads, hosted lake cleanup days for Instagram posts. It was their trophy, their jewel, and now they had to face the fact they never owned it at all. By evening, my inbox filled with messages that ranged from politely manipulative to outright hostile. Surely we can come to a mutual understanding. You're hurting your neighbors, not the HOA. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded every one to my attorney. That night, a faint knock echoed at my door. I'd opened it to find a man in a gray suit, the HOA's lawyer, sent as a messenger. He didn't threaten me directly, but his words were laced with pressure. He said the HOA intended to challenge the deed's validity and file an injunction to restore access. I thanked him politely, closed the door, and smiled. Because I already knew they couldn't win. Over the next few days, the neighborhood began to unravel. Without access to the lake, the HOA's events were canceled. The fishing club disbanded. Kayaks were pulled off the racks and stored in garages. Parents argued at board meetings about losing property value. And Elaine? She doubled down. She sent letters to every resident, calling me a squatter with a stolen title. She told them I had hacked the records and fake documents. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't accept, was that I had the original 1976 plat maps, certified and notarized, showing clear ownership boundaries. One morning, I woke up to find orange spray paint on my mailbox. Thief. Another day, someone threw a dead fish onto my dock. Petty intimidation tactics, the kind that told me I was getting under their skin. But then came the breaking point. A maintenance crew, hired by the HOA, arrived at the lake with a portable pump and heavy machinery. They claimed they were repairing the drainage system for the community water feature. But I knew exactly what they were doing, trying to drain a portion of my lake to force county intervention. I stood on the dock, filming everything with my phone as the pump roared to life. They ignored me at first. Then Elaine arrived, barking orders, face flushed, eyes burning behind those oversized sunglasses. She shouted something about restoring order and removing squatters. The scene turned chaotic, shouting, water splashing, the mechanical hum echoing across the valley. I called the sheriff's office, calmly reporting unauthorized property damage. When the deputies arrived, it was almost cinematic. The pump went silent. The crowd went still. The officer examined my paperwork, and then, in front of everyone, turned to Elaine and said, "Ma'am, you're trespassing." Her face drained of color. The HOA members murmured, confused, defensive, terrified. The deputies escorted the maintenance crew off the property and issued a written warning. That was the moment the balance shifted. I became the villain in their story, but the hero in my own. Within a week, the HOA's finances began to buckle. Without access to the lake, several residents withheld their dues. Property values dipped as listings were withdrawn. Realtors called it an unfortunate legal situation. The board held another emergency session. Elaine's leadership was questioned for the first time. People whispered about her arrogance, her refusal to read the fine print, her obsession with control. Meanwhile, I quietly met with my attorney to draft the next move, a civil notice for unauthorized use of private property, dating back years. Every HOA event, every dock maintenance, every landscaping expense on my land, all of it was potential grounds for reimbursement. We calculated the total damages. Over $127,000. When the letter was served to the HOA office, it landed like a bomb. That night, from across the water, I saw lights in the clubhouse flicker as the board gathered in silence. Through the still air, faint voices carried the sound of a kingdom realizing it had lost its crown. The lake reflected their panic perfectly. Calm on the surface. Turmoil beneath. But I knew Elaine wasn't done. Not yet. She was the kind of woman who'd rather drown than admit defeat. And deep down, I felt it. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. The lake had gone silent again, too silent. No laughter. No boats. No music from the far shore. Only the low hum of cicadas and the slow rippling of water against the dock posts. It should have felt like victory. But something in that stillness felt wrong. After the cease and desist order, the HOA kept their distance. The sheriff's warning had shaken them, and for weeks, it seemed like they were retreating, quiet, humiliated, defeated. Elaine stopped sending letters. The patrols ceased. The neighborhood meetings went strangely unannounced. Yet beneath that eerie calm, I sensed movement. Something was brewing. Then came the first storm. It was mid-September, one of those unpredictable late summer tempests that rolls in out of nowhere. The air thickened by noon, and by evening, lightning cracked across the sky like white veins splitting the heavens. Rain came hard. Sheets of it. By nightfall, my backyard was a swamp, the dock nearly underwater, the lake rising higher than I'd ever seen. And that's when I noticed something strange. The culvert at the north end, the one that drained excess water into the county stream, was blocked. I threw on a raincoat, grabbed a flashlight, and waded into the storm. Branches, debris, and a sheet of plywood hammered in place. Someone had intentionally sealed the drainage outlet. As I pried it loose, my flashlight beam caught something else, spray-painted letters across the board. Enough. The water was rising fast. Too fast. By midnight, the shoreline had breached. Water spilled across the walking paths and into the lower lawns of several HOA homes, Elaine's among them. The storm turned into chaos. Flashing lights. Sirens. Neighbors in robes and raincoats shouting as the lake pushed further inland. The same people who'd once accused me of trespassing were now knee-deep in their own flooded lawns. And me? I just stood there, drenched, realizing the twisted irony. The water they fought to control was now taking back everything. By dawn, the rain stopped. The sun rose on a war zone of debris and mud. Dock fragments littered the shore. Patio furniture floated like wreckage. The HOA blamed me immediately. Elaine filed a complaint with the county, accusing me of tampering with water management structures. She claimed my reckless ownership caused thousands in property damage. But I was ready. I handed over photos, time-stamped, showing the blocked culvert before I touched it. The sheriff took one look and said it was sabotage. Forensics later confirmed hammer marks inconsistent with my tools. Someone had nailed it shut from the outside. And then came the discovery that changed everything. When county engineers surveyed the drainage system, they uncovered a network of illegal HOA modifications. For years, the board had secretly rerouted runoff lines, installed unauthorized pumps, and manipulated the water level to enhance curb appeal. For the houses closest to the shore, Elaine's included. They'd tampered with my lake for years. Now the damage was undeniable, and fully documented. When the county report went public, it was a dagger straight through the HOA's heart. Local news picked it up. Headlines read, HOA accused of illegal lake alterations, private owner fights back. Elaine's name was plastered everywhere. Neighbors who once idolized her now whispered behind closed doors. The board fractured. Members resigned. Lawsuits loomed. But she still refused to back down. A week later, I caught her standing at the edge of the waterline. No clipboard this time, no sunglasses. Just her, hollow-eyed, motionless, staring at the lake like it had betrayed her. The wind whipped through the cattails, carrying her voice across the water. Though I couldn't hear the words, I could feel the rage in them, the kind that eats away at people from the inside. By October, the HOA was bleeding money. Legal fees. Repairs. Cleanup costs. They tried to hold a community fundraiser. Only 5 people showed up. The power that once ruled this neighborhood had vanished, drowned beneath their own arrogance. But there was still one final twist waiting in the dark. Late one night, I woke to the sound of splashing, not the soft lap of water, but frantic movement, like someone waiting near the dock. Jasper barked from the porch. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside, and scanned the surface. At first, nothing. Then, movement near the reeds. A figure. Someone in a dark coat, half submerged, dragging something heavy toward the water. My beam caught the glint of metal, a can. A gasoline can. Before I could shout, they dropped it and ran, disappearing into the tree line. When I reached the spot, the can was half full, sloshing in the mud. A torn scrap of paper clung to its side, soaked but legible enough to read one word written in black marker. Enough. I called the sheriff again. They searched the area, found footprints leading toward the road, boot prints matching a woman's size. They couldn't prove it was Elaine. But they didn't have to. By morning, she was gone. House empty. Lexus missing. Mail piling up on her porch. The HOA issued a vague statement about leadership transition and unforeseen personal matters. But everyone knew. She had vanished, leaving behind a trail of chaos and waterlogged regrets. And the lake? It was quiet again. A perfect mirror once more, calm, deep, unbothered. But beneath that glassy surface, I knew its secret: the truth always rises. A realistic cinematic scene sequence depicting a modern lakeside neighborhood torn apart by an HOA power struggle. For weeks after Elaine vanished, the neighborhood seemed frozen in time. No HOA meetings. No newsletters. No lake maintenance crews. Just silence, the kind that hums in your bones. Leaves began to fall, blanketing the muddy lawns left behind by the flood. Mailboxes sagged under the weight of unpaid bills. The proud symmetry of the subdivision, once trimmed and polished to perfection, now looked tired, abandoned, almost haunted. It was strange, watching it all decay so quickly. These people had worshipped rules, power-washed driveways, identical mailboxes, manicured lawns. The HOA was their religion. And now their faith had drowned. But the water didn't stop changing. Every day, I'd walk the perimeter, documenting the lake's slow return to balance. Fish had come back. The herons nested again in the shallows. Nature was reclaiming what bureaucracy had choked for decades. And yet, I could feel the eyes. Even without Elaine, there were still those who resented me, the quiet whispers, the sideways glances when I drove through the gate. To them, I wasn't a neighbor. I was the man who destroyed the community. Then one afternoon, I received a letter, not from the HOA, but from a law firm. Inside was a single line. Our clients intend to file suit to reclaim the lake as community property under easement by use. It was signed by 8 homeowners. I should have felt anger. But instead I laughed. Because the irony was almost poetic. They'd spent years treating me as an intruder on my own land. Now they wanted my property rights back, as if they could legislate away karma. Still, I knew better than to ignore it. Lawsuits were like water. Once they started flowing, they found every crack. So I prepared. My attorney, a meticulous man named Greg Simmons, met me in my kitchen that evening. His voice was calm but firm as he flipped through the documents. The claim was weak, no historical precedent, no supporting records, and easily disproven by the original plat. But he also warned me. They're not trying to win. They're trying to exhaust you. And he was right. Over the next month, the flood of paperwork began: discovery demands, document requests, witness statements, depositions. It wasn't about justice. It was about wearing me down. But they underestimated how far I was willing to go. I spent nights combing through county archives, pulling microfilm maps, photographing historical plats, and even interviewing a retired surveyor who'd worked on the original estate. Each piece of evidence built the same conclusion: the lake had never belonged to the HOA, not legally, not structurally, not even symbolically. It had always been private. It had always been mine. When the court hearing finally arrived, the tension in that small county chamber was suffocating. Across from me sat the homeowners, dressed in their suburban best, pale and tight-lipped. And there, 2 rows behind them, was a face I didn't expect to see. Elaine Carter. She looked different. Gaunt. Exhausted. Her once perfect posture slumped. The kind of person who had stared too long into her own reflection and didn't like what she saw. The whispers spread like wildfire when she entered, but she ignored them, sitting quietly in the back, her eyes fixed on me. The case lasted all of 40 minutes. The judge read the documents, reviewed the plat, and leaned forward. Based on the presented evidence, she said, her voice echoing softly through the chamber, there is no legal foundation for the plaintiff's claim. The property in question belongs solely to Mr. Harlan. Case dismissed. It was over. The homeowners filed out without a word. Elaine lingered for a moment, her gaze meeting mine, and for the first time, there was no anger in her eyes. Only something quieter. Regret, maybe? Outside, the sky was clear, the air sharp with the scent of pine. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But peace doesn't last long in places built on resentment. A week later, a realtor's sign appeared near the entrance. Multiple properties for sale, motivated sellers. Families began leaving. Driveways emptied. Yards went untended. The HOA, gutted of members, officially dissolved 2 months later. The clubhouse closed, the tennis courts fell into disrepair, and the private roads were turned over to county management. One by one, the people who had tried to control me, the ones who'd mocked me, painted my mailbox, called me a thief, all disappeared. All except one. Elaine never left. She stayed in her house, curtains drawn, car unmoved. The gossips said she'd lost her savings and legal fees. Others claimed she spent her days writing letters she never mailed. Sometimes, at dusk, I'd see her walking along the lake's edge, alone, barefoot, staring at the water. I never waved. She never looked up. But we both knew what tied us together: this lake, this quiet war, and everything it had taken from us. One evening, near winter's edge, I found something on my dock, a small, weathered envelope, weighed down by a stone. Inside was a note written in a shaky hand. "You were right. I just couldn't let go. No apology. No excuse. Just truth, stripped bare." I folded it carefully, tucked it into my coat, and stood watching as the last light faded behind the trees. The water reflected everything: the sky, the memories, the ghosts. And for the first time, it felt like it was giving something back. Not revenge. Not triumph. Winter came early that year. The lake froze thin and glassy, a silver mirror stretching under a pale sky. The subdivision that once buzzed with golf carts and gossip was now quiet, too quiet. Most of the houses were dark, for sale, signs leaning in the wind like weary sentinels. And yet, despite the silence, I could feel it: the tension hadn't fully died. It had only gone underground. Elaine's note stayed on my desk for weeks. Sometimes I'd reread it, wondering what she meant by, "I just couldn't let go." It sounded like surrender, but it carried something else, a warning maybe. Then one morning, I found out what she meant. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery, the metallic growl of an engine echoing across the frozen lake. I pulled on a jacket and stepped outside. There, at the far end of the waterline, stood 2 excavators and a crew of men in neon vests. They were tearing up soil, laying thick plastic piping, and erecting stakes with red flags. The sight hit me like ice water. This wasn't maintenance. This was infrastructure. I shouted across the lake, voice carrying through the cold air. One of the men waved a clipboard and yelled back, "New water main! County approved!" County approved? On my property? I drove to the site, the frozen dirt crunching beneath my boots. When I demanded paperwork, the foreman handed me a permit stamped with a county seal. It listed, "Authorization for utility expansion, filed by HOA Development Committee." My stomach turned. The HOA no longer legally existed, but the paperwork had been filed months earlier, back when Elaine still ruled. It had somehow slipped through the cracks, a ghost permit that hadn't been cancelled after the dissolution. And now, that ghost had come back to life. If the project finished, the county would install permanent easements along my shore, effectively slicing off part of my land for public access. I called my attorney immediately. His voice, usually calm, carried an edge this time. "They're trying to rewrite history," he said. "If those pipes go in, the easement becomes permanent. You'll lose the lake." The thought clawed at me. Everything, every fight, every sleepless night, every ounce of peace I'd earned, could be undone by one buried line in a forgotten file. For 2 days I fought. We filed emergency injunctions. I faxed documents, drove to county offices, made endless calls. Bureaucracy moved like mud. Every hour mattered, and they knew it. The construction continued. The machines hummed day and night. Then, just before dusk on the 3rd day, a familiar figure appeared at the site. Elaine. She stood at the edge of the frozen water, wrapped in a long coat, watching the crew. Her hair, once sleek and controlled, was loose and streaked with gray. She didn't see me at first, or maybe she did, and didn't care. When she finally turned, her face was pale but strangely calm. And that's when I understood, she'd orchestrated this months ago. A last move, planted like a seed before she fell. This wasn't about reclaiming the lake. It was about erasing me from it. That night, I stayed awake, staring out at the moonlit ice. I could see the faint lights of the construction site flickering across the water like restless ghosts. And then, the sound came. A crack, deep and echoing. The lake ice split open. By morning, the ground near the construction zone had collapsed. The machine stood half submerged in icy mud. Water surged through the trenches, filling the newly dug channels like veins finding their heart. The crew had hit a buried spring, an underground water vein that fed directly into the lake. The more they tried to drain it, the more it pushed back. Nature had taken its side, my side. The county halted the project immediately, declaring it unsafe. The permits were suspended pending investigation. When the inspectors came, they uncovered what I had suspected all along: The original utility plans had been falsified. Signatures forged. Dates mismatched. And the applicant's name, in fine print, was Elaine Carter. She had submitted it just days before she disappeared. It was her final attempt at control, one last play to remind me that no one escapes the HOA forever. But it had backfired spectacularly. The county not only voided the permit but opened a full audit into all HOA projects from the last decade. Funds were missing. Records altered. Accounts mismanaged. The scandal spread quickly. Local news returned. Cameras flashed. Headlines read, "Former HOA president under investigation for fraud forgery." Elaine's house was searched. The next week, she was taken in for questioning. They found falsified invoices, bank statements, even handwritten notes about lake improvements that were really cover-ups for unauthorized spending. When they showed her the evidence, she didn't deny it. She just said quietly, "It was never about money. It was about order." That line stayed with me for a long time. She wasn't wrong. In her own way, she believed she was protecting something, a structure, a system, a fragile illusion of control. But order without fairness is just tyranny in a tidy neighborhood. When the case closed, I stood once more on my dock, watching the last of the county trucks leave. The lake was calm again. The ice melting. For the first time, the reflection staring back wasn't of conflict or defiance. It was of survival. Elaine's house went dark for good soon after. Rumor had it she moved in with her sister out of state. Some said she was sick. Others said she just couldn't face the lake anymore. Either way, she was gone. And what remained wasn't just peace, it was balance. The kind nature restores when people finally stop trying to own what was never meant to be. Spring crept in quietly that year, as if the earth itself was exhaling after a long, frozen breath. The lake thawed slowly, layer by layer, until the water beneath shimmered with new life. The ducks returned. The reeds swayed again in the morning wind. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt alive. The neighborhood was nearly empty now, a ghost of its former self. The lawns were overgrown, the driveways cracked, the once manicured perfection replaced by wildflowers pushing through concrete. Without the HOA's iron grip, nature had moved in, untamed, unapologetic, free. And strangely, it suited the place better. I spent my mornings walking the perimeter, coffee in hand, Jasper padding beside me. There was peace in that silence now, not tension. The air carried the faint smell of pine and wet soil, and every ripple on the lake's surface seemed to whisper of closure. But sometimes, just as dawn broke, I'd catch a glimpse of movement across the far shore, Elaine's old house, still standing, its curtains drawn tight. It had been months since anyone had seen her. The county had cleared her of criminal charges, citing mitigating mental distress. But the damage was done. Her reputation was gone. Her power stripped. Her empire erased. One morning, a small boat appeared near the old clubhouse dock. It was weathered, half covered in moss, tied loosely to a broken post. Inside lay a stack of papers sealed in a plastic sleeve. Curiosity outweighed caution. I waded over, pried it open, and found pages of handwritten notes, Elaine's handwriting, unmistakable. They weren't letters of anger or guilt but something else entirely, confessions, sketches, maps of the lake drawn with obsessive care. She had been cataloging every depth, every contour, every hidden spring beneath the surface. In one corner of the final page, written faintly in pencil, were 4 words. "The lake chose you." It didn't make sense at first. But standing there, watching the wind push ripples across the water, I understood. This place had been fighting long before I ever arrived. The HOA tried to claim it, to fence it, to label it as amenity. But the lake resisted in its own quiet way, through floods and springs, through collapse and renewal. It didn't belong to anyone, not her, not me. It simply was. A living thing that outlasted every attempt to cage it. Over the next few weeks, I made a decision. I contacted the county again, but not to fight. This time, I offered something different. I donated the lake and the surrounding land to a local conservation trust, under one condition: it could never be developed, never commercialized, never sold again. It would remain wild forever. The paperwork took time, but when I finally signed it, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of ownership, of battle, of anger, finally slipped away. The day the transfer became official, I walked down to the dock one last time. The air was cool and soft, the surface of the lake glass smooth. In the distance, the sun dipped low, painting everything gold. Jasper sat beside me, tail wagging softly, as if sensing the end of something important. The world was quiet except for the gentle lap of water against wood. I could almost hear Elaine's voice in the wind, calm now, distant, carried away across the still water. That night, as I locked the house for the last time, I turned to look at the lake one more time. It glowed faintly in the moonlight, serene, endless. A mirror of everything that had come and gone, every fight, every loss, every truth that refused to stay buried. The water didn't belong to anyone now. It was finally free. And maybe that was the real victory all along. Not ownership. Not revenge. But release.